Where'd Lyman go?
All right.
I'm going to
you,
run the techie
Susie.
stuff over
Yeah,
here.
Esther's taken the, she took the option of running the equipment, but we're going to hear from her for sure. Or if not, I wouldn't be here. And the truth is, I wouldn't be here either if, in any case, if it weren't for Esther and her amazing talent and her beautiful work, her vision and her artistic eye, and just the way that she has taken
gonna make me
these
cry,
little
Lyman.
stories that I've written and given them life with illustration is, I can't even begin to express it. And I'm a writer and I can't express it. And what you'll note tonight is that there is a reason I write, and that's because I have a hard time saying what I want to say like this. I have to sit down and be at my computer, and then I can say what I really want to say. But one of the things I want to say tonight is thank you for being here. And I'm really excited to have a chance to share a few minutes with you and share some stories. And Susie said that I've been telling stories, and I think that's the best way to put it. Oftentimes people will put historian by my name, and I'm not a historian, and I'm the first one to tell you that I'm not a historian. A historian is someone who went to school to be a historian and knows what it means to collect and to document and to write history. That's not me. I tell stories. And I depend on those great historians for the raw material for the stories that I tell. And so if you ever see a historian by my name, you know I didn't put it there. Because I don't claim to be that, but I do claim to have known and do know many great historians that I appreciate and admire, and quite frankly, wouldn't be able to do what I do without their work. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Esther and my collaboration and the three books that we've done together. But before we do that, I want to, Halloween has passed, and the story we're going to talk about tonight is a Christmas story. And I know it's still way too early to be talking about Christmas. I apologize for that up front, but at least we got Halloween behind us. And I think this would be more apropos maybe after Thanksgiving when the Christmas season really should start. But we are, so I guess I'm asking your indulgence to kind of dive into Christmas tonight on the 2nd of November, which still is way too early.
Never too early. November's free Christmas.
And I also just have to recognize my dear friend Mike Gardner at the back there. What a great fellow. Mike, as we've known each other for many, many years, and to see him here tonight is very special and heartening as well. So I think there are a handful of us who were born in this valley. Now, I'm not going to try to suggest that just because you were born here, you're special, or that you're more special than anyone else. But for the purposes of our discussion tonight, I'd just like to have you raise your hand if you were born here. Esther, myself, Sharon, and Rachel.
Are you talking about Jeff St. George?
You know, right now I am. I really apologize because Hurricane is very, very special. And so is every place that you all were born. I'm not saying that St. George is any more special than any other place, but there's a handful of us that were, oh yes it is. We're, what's that word where that's kind of politically, well, it's somewhat controversial as to whether, we're exceptional. Is America exceptional? Is St. George exceptional? Yes, and Hurricane's exceptional, and every place that we come from is exceptional. But I just wanted to get a sense of that. And before we start, I just love, for those of you who were born here, what are some of the images of Christmas that stand out in your mind from a community standpoint? Just what images come to your mind? You lived on the boulevard. You grew up on the boulevard. And I remember those images perfectly from my childhood. Esther, do you remember them? You grew up
Absolutely.
You grew up Esther grew up right in this neighborhood where we're
That's
sitting.
why they're in the book.
Right now.
The Santa
We're gonna
across
get to
tabernacle, yes.
We're going to get to that. So the one I remember really vividly is the bells. There were 3 big plastic bells with lights in them, and they'd go light, 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 like they were ringing, going back and forth and ringing across the boulevard. Where did Santa Claus go? When he came into town, where did he go? Where we could all connect with him? Pickett's, Lumber and Hardware.
Right next door.
And it's the building right next door to us on the boulevard where Steamroller Copies is now. If you walk into the Steamroller Copies area, that used to be one of the largest rooms in St. George for us little kids. It's now just a small little place, but it's still the same size it was then, but then it was much bigger because it held every toy known to man at Christmas time on those aisles, up and down those aisles. And so Santa would come down the highway on the fire truck, and then he'd go into Pickett's, and then he would sit on a pedestal in the back. And it's all, it all comes down to merchandising, because people would line up, parents with their kids would line up, and the lines were long, and you'd have to go line up and down the toy aisles. And so you walked very slowly past all the toys at that time known to man on those shelves, and after an hour or so of waiting in line, you finally got to Santa. And in the meantime, your parents had very subtly become aware of what it was. Oh no, Santa Claus became very subtly aware of what it was you wanted for Christmas. And so what we're describing tonight is probably the same kinds of things that all of us remember from our childhoods in the towns or cities where we grew up. Some different aspect of that. There's a lot of universality to that Christmas experience, but those of us who grew up here, we just kind of feel like it was exceptional here. In fact, it was so exceptional to me that I wrote a story about it. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But before we do, I just want to quickly share that. Was it about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, Esther and I collaborated on this book. And what does it say? 2019, so that's 4 years ago.
Took a year to do it, though.
This is, all three of these books are fiction, but they're all three based on memories and experiences and true accounts and events that happened mostly in my life and in the life of my family. But this story is about growing up in a place where it doesn't snow at Christmas time. And feeling snow deprived. And going to the mountains, and I'll try not to take too much time here, but encountering snow as children and finding out how snow actually forms into snowballs and how fun it can be. And then it's time to go home, and the kids are all sad because they have to go back where there's no snow. And one of the little guys says, "Wait a minute, can't we just take this home?" And he says to his dad, "It can go up there, and it can go right up on top of the minivan." And so the story, the real tension of the story is how that snowball will make it all the way back home. And this story is set in St. George, but it doesn't say St. George. The snow area is Pine Valley, but it doesn't say Pine Valley. This is a universal story of that's set here, but that anyone who doesn't have snow at Christmas would hopefully relate to. And over the last 4 years, we've learned that a lot of people have related to this story and really enjoyed it. Again, based on an actual trip when we took our grandkids to Pine Valley, and they just cried their eyes out when it was time to come home, and they wanted to bring that snowball. And my son, bless his heart, he talked me into it, and we figured out how to get this snowball. It was this big, up on top of the minivan, and it held together. We bungee corded, we did all kinds of things. All the way back, Debbie and I were in the car behind watching this go like this, and both of us saying this will never make it home. And I'm not going to spoil the end of the story. That's one we did. And this is where it started with Esther and myself, because I had this story. I'd written it 20 years ago. And it actually appeared as a short piece in St. George magazine 20 or 25 years ago. But I always felt like this would be such an awesome or such a fun story to have illustrated. And I just didn't know how to approach that or what to do. And I'm not going to go deep into the story, but Debbie and I were at a ward Christmas dinner 5 years ago or so, and we're sitting there and we're looking across the room, and there's Ester West sitting over there. And I had seen some of the wonderful work that Esther's done as an artist and as an illustrator. And in that moment, it was like, okay, I'm going to talk to her. I've known Esther all my life, but we haven't really, known each other as, close friends or associates, but we've known each other, and I've always admired Esther in so many ways. But it wasn't until that moment at that dinner that I thought, well, maybe I could share this story with Esther. And so I walked up to her. I was really, what's the word? I wasn't scared, but I was anxious because I could just see Esther saying, "Oh no, I don't want to do that." But what what she said is, yes, I'd love to have you come over. So Debbie and I went over and sat down with her and Lester, and I shared this story. I read this story to her, and within days she was already working on the sketches, and I had no idea that this would be the result. The amazing, wonderful. Here's a little boy with his inner tube wanting to go tubing. And so that came together. That was at Christmas time, and so it was the next Christmas that this first book came out. And then I had another story that I had written years ago that had been published in 2 or 3 different places. And it's a story about going after a Christmas tree. And again, there's that universal thing. There's those intersections that we all can relate to when it comes to going to find a Christmas tree. And so after A Snowball's Chance, I started to adapt this manuscript with the hopes that Esther would take it on as well. And she did. And she not only took it on and did, the illustrations in this book are, you'll notice that her style with each book changes and adapts to the story and to the feel, the spirit of the story. And again, I couldn't have imagined what she would end up coming up with for this story. But she also played an editorial role with me that was very helpful. In fact, she's always played a very helpful editorial role because she's a wonderful writer herself, and she was a middle school librarian for how many years, Esther?
16.
16 years. And she has a really strong sense of children's literature and has been very helpful to me in this whole process. Although I don't consider these children's literature, these are written for adults. And then hopefully you'll read them to your kids. And even the little kids, from what we've learned, enjoy them. But they're written for all ages, and they're meant to connect the generations and to find those kind of universal points that we all relate to. So one of the really fun things that Esther came up with on this book is during the course of the story, there were different rules for Christmas tree hunting that kind of emerged. And Esther brought them all together in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rules of Christmas tree hunting. So let me just review those quickly with you because it's going to be coming up soon and you need to have these rules. Rule number 1, get an early start to find the best tree. Rule number 2, it would not be Christmas without the smell of real pine in the house. Number 3, spend the day getting closer as a family. And there's a lot of meaning to that word closer in the story. Number 4, don't forget the saw. And that's based in truth. Number 5, this is probably the most important one of all. There's always a better tree over the next ridge. Number 6, leave the forest before dark. And I can attest to that as well. And number 7, we came to get a tree and we're not leaving without one. So Esther, I need to give you some equal time here before I dive in.
Let's read the story.
Okay.
Oh, you want to read the story last? Let's do the story, and then I'll talk a little bit.
Well, I'm gonna share this new story with you. Doesn't take very long, so just hang in there, and then maybe Esther can share a little bit about how she approached the illustrations for this book, because it's really an interesting approach, and then we could maybe talk about any things that you guys might want to talk about, but we'll have you out of here inside the hour. That's the cover. I don't have the cover up on this PDF, but some of you will recognize that landscape. Lee, do you recognize that landscape? Monument Valley. And most people nowadays call it the Forrest Gump Highway.
Yeah.
That's about where Forrest Gump was running in the movie. But that's a road that I've traveled since I was 1 year old, as we went to visit my grandparents in San Juan County in Blanding. And my mom came to Dixie College in 1953, and she met my dad, who grew up on Tabernacle Street, just a couple of blocks from here, and then I was their first child in 1955. But twice a year, from the time I was born, I rode in the car to Blanding to visit Grandma and Grandpa. And I didn't realize it then, but it's still true. You cannot get there from here. The greatest gash on earth is between here and there, and Lake Powell fills most of it. And you either go way north and come back down through Moab, or you go way south and come back up through Monument Valley and then across into Mexican Hat and to Bluff and then Blanding. And the way my parents always went was the southern route. And when I was just a little kid, most of it, or a big portion of it, was dirt road. And we would head out of here. Sometimes we'd go through Zion and then down through Kanab. Sometimes we'd go around through Colorado City. But we would always end up, when I was really young, we would always end up at Navajo Bridge and cross the Colorado there and go all the way down to Tuba City, Arizona, and then all the way back up to Kayenta. And that's probably all right, unless you guys... But it was a trip that always began well before the sun came up and always ended late at night. It just took 12, 14 hours or more to drive to Grandma's house. And those were really, excuse the pun, but monumental journeys. And but Monument Valley was always a big part of that ride. Anyway, this story reflects my memories as a little boy experiencing Christmas here in St. George, but also crossing what I always called the promised land all the way to Grandma's house. And so most of what I want to share is in the story, so I'll shut up and share it now. But I do want to point out a couple of things. This is so fun how Esther, if you look at the end papers, that's the cover, the paper on the cover, and that comes across. She's created a the road to Grandma's house. But that's only half of it. You come to the end papers at the end of the book, and you continue on until you get all the way to Grandma's house. This is a graphic technique that I just think is so ingenious and wonderful, and makes just adds another element to this book that I'm so happy about. But this is a real Christmas story. These other two are Christmas themed and Christmas related, but this is our kind of a real Christmas story. And Esther, do you want to? Well, I'm gonna read from the book, but you'll see the illustrations on the screen here. So I move back here. All right. On the day before Christmas, I sat in my favorite chair. I gazed wistfully at the glorious tree in our living room. A mountain of brightly wrapped presents rose all around it. Suddenly, and to my surprise, my granddaughter Grace appeared before me. She had arrived in the night with her parents. I was very happy she would be spending Christmas at our house this year. Grace looked at me through sparkling eyes. She had traveled all the way from Boston. Those eyes were full of joy and hope and excitement for the season. "Papa," she asked with an anxious sigh, "will Santa Claus know where to find me so far from my house?" Fortunately, I knew the answer. I've known it since I myself was a child. I answered Grace's question with a story. Now we're going back in time. Long, long ago, when I was little like you, I lived on the edge of a small town. Each year as Christmas approached, my mother would take me uptown where the streets were lined with wonderful, colorful decorations. My heart would soar because it meant Santa would be coming soon. Santa always, without fail, found my house on the edge of town. One Christmas, Mom took me to the hardware store on Main Street. Not much text on that spread, so we'll leave it up for just a moment.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, leave it up.
I was really getting into it.
No, that's good. Just inside the door were rows and rows of the most magnificent toys. Up and down the aisles, the tall shelves brimmed with silver airplanes and shiny trucks and footballs and electric trains and roller skates and baseball mitts. There were shelves stacked with dolls and games and stuffed animals and just about everything you could imagine. At the back of the store was a platform that looked like the North Pole. There sat the most wonderful man on earth. The line to talk to Santa Claus ran all the way down one toy aisle and all the way up another until it finally reached the place where Santa sat. It was the longest line I had ever seen. While I waited to talk to Santa, there was plenty of time to look at every toy along every row. Mom asked me which ones I liked most. I liked most all of them, but there was one I liked most of all. It was a splendid farm set with a barn and corrals and horses and cows and sheep and pigs and ducks and a manger with hay in it. I adored that farm set. More than anything, I hoped Santa would bring it to me. That's exactly what I told Santa when I finally got to talk to him. When I slid down from his lap, Mom asked me what I told the jolly old man in the red suit. I told him I want a farm set, I said. Mom smiled and said, "Did you tell him you'll be at your grandma's house this Christmas?" Suddenly, the joy in my heart turned to despair. Tears filled my eyes. How could I have forgotten to give Santa that important information? He had always found me at our house on the edge of town, but this year I would be at my grandma's house, all the way across the desert, through the canyon, on the other side of the river, over the mountain, and through the valley of tall rocks. How would he ever find me there? I sniffled sadly all the way home. "He'll never find me at Grandma's house," I whimpered. Mom just smiled and said, "He knows." Mom helped me write a letter to the North Pole to tell Santa where I'd be on Christmas morning. It was so close to Christmas, I knew my letter would not get there in time. As the days passed, I worried about how Santa would find me all the way across the desert, through the canyon, on the other side of the river, over the mountain, and through the valley of tall rocks. Mom tried to comfort me. Over and over she said, "He knows." Early in the morning on the day before Christmas, long before the sun came up, Dad lifted me and my little sister out of our warm beds and placed us in the cold back seat of the car. He wrapped us in blankets, and we set out into the darkness. I watched over the seat as the car lights magically opened the dark world before us. The farther we got from home, the sadder I felt. I made it across the desert and into the canyon, but by the time we got to the bridge, my eyes were full of tears. The sun was up now, and it was a bright and beautiful winter day, but we had so many miles still to go. It was the longest journey on earth. I fell asleep as we began to climb the mountain. In my dreams, I saw Santa looking for me, but I was too far from home. I awoke as we entered the valley of tall rocks. It was an enchanted place. The rocks stood like statues. They looked like people, and they looked like animals. Mom started a game. She asked me and my sister which of the standing rocks looked like an owl, and which looked like a ship, and which looked like a mitten. Before long, the sun began to set on the far horizon. It was well after dark when in the distance I saw the comforting glow of the little town where Grandma lived. As we drove up to her house, the golden light from the windows welcomed us, and even though I was very tired and very worried, I felt warm inside. When I stepped into the house, Grandma was waiting in her rocking chair. She held me close. Then she held me out at the end of her arms and told me how big I was getting, and she kissed me on the cheek. These many years later, I can still feel her loving arms around me and the music in her voice and that kiss on my cheek. We walked across the creaking floor of the kitchen and started up the steep stairs to the bedrooms. The carpet on the steps was worn through to the wood. The room at the top of the landing was filled with old chests and old-fashioned furniture and all kinds of ancient objects. I climbed into a squeaky old bed that sounded like it was crying every time I moved. The sheets were icy cold, but the quilt that covered me was as heavy as time. Soon I grew warm under the covers. A hot tear squeezed out of my eye and ran cold down my cheek. How would Santa ever find me in this old house so far from where I lived? Mom came quietly into the room. "Don't worry," she tried to reassure me. "He knows." I awoke at first light on Christmas morning. I slid out from under the cozy quilt. My bare feet hit the frigid floor, and I gasped as I hopped across the wavy linoleum to the window. There was snow on the ground outside. The frost-glazed trees sparkled in the morning light. I hurried down the hall to where my parents slept. Soon they were up, and we woke my sister, and it was time to go down the stairs. Time to discover if Santa had somehow figured out how far I had strayed from home. It's been more than a half century since that morning, but I remember it as perfectly as if it were last Christmas. I treaded slowly, reluctantly, hopefully, down the creaking stairs. I stopped for a moment at the door to the living room. My heart bounced like a ball in my chest. Finally, I stepped into the magnificent brightness. There I saw the scene that sealed my confidence in Santa Claus forever. Beneath Grandma's tree, all the way across the desert, through the canyon, on the other side of the river, over the mountain, and through the valley of tall rocks, I saw the most magnificent farm spread out perfectly before me. The barn, the fences, the cows and sheep and horses, and the manger filled with hay. I had never felt such joy. He knew, Grace said with delight. Yes, he knew, I said as I looked into her dancing eyes. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. I spoke softly to Grace as the first rays of morning spilled a dreamlike sheen across the living room. I told her that since that Christmas long ago, I've always known I could depend on Santa. I looked over at the shelf near the Christmas tree. On it were several very old and time-worn plastic animals placed around a plastic manger filled with plastic hay. I told Grace this was all that was left of the treasured farm set I got for Christmas when I was a child. She leaped for joy and skipped over to the shelf. When I was little, I said to Grace, I thought Christmas was about all the fun gifts you get on Christmas morning. Santa always knew just what I wanted and right where to find me. He always made my dreams come true. Grace looked closely at the faded farm figures on the shelf. Then she looked around at me. I pointed her toward another display on the next shelf over. It was a group of perfect shiny porcelain figures placed around a manger. Now I'm old, I said, and my long journey of life has taught me what Christmas is truly about. It's about each of those people who traveled so far to come to the manger. 2 of them came all the way from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Some left their flocks of sheep far back in the hills and walked the long path to the stable. 3 who were rich and wise came from miles and miles away in the east, bearing gifts they traversed so far. You see, Grace, my Christmas journey has taught me it's not what you get on Christmas Day, it's what you bring to the manger. Sometimes the journey is long, like the one you made yesterday, all the way from Boston, like the one I made those many years ago to Grandma's house. Once you get there, you discover that Christmas is, most of all, about the one who is the greatest gift of all, the one who loves you forever and always knows where you are, no matter how far you stray from home. Grace studied the glossy little statues on the shelf. Finally, she reached in and picked up the precious figure of a baby. She reverently stepped over to the worn-out old farm set. With care, she placed the bright and beautiful baby in the old plastic manger and said, I know. The end. Get up here, Esther.
I'll give everybody time to leave if they want to. What Lyman didn't say at that ward dinner is I had been praying because I had done some books on my own, and I felt like I really wanted an opportunity to develop my talent. And I had prayed about that. And then Lyman approaches me about doing this book. So I have found when I really wanted to do something and I prayed about it, people and things were put in my path that allowed me to do that. My motivation is always my grandkids. No Jack here, huh? And my son-in-law's asleep. So. Her littlest boy, Jack, is my inspiration for the little boy in this one, but he's not here. But my grandchildren have been my motivation. My great-grandfather, William Atkin, left a wonderful journey of his trek across the plains. And so it was all written down, but very detailed and too hard for kids. And so I thought, I really, really want to do this for my grandkids. And I had a degree in art, and I was a librarian for all those many years, but still, when you graduate, you're really not an artist. You have to put a lot of time in to really be an artist. So I really didn't know what to do. But I had an epiphany in the temple. And at that time, scrapbook paper was all the rage. And so I thought, I will make it like a quilt and use all this fun scrapbook paper. So I hand cut these little illustrations out of paper and then just scanned them. And I used my great-grandfather's writing on the bottom, and then I simplified it on the top. So they were able to have his journal in a shortened form. So that got me started. And then I was a temple worker and reading all the stories of the pioneers, how they just miraculously built this gorgeous building. And again, I want my grandchildren to know and understand about all the sacrifices that were made by their great-great-grandparents and ancestors. But I wanted it to be a really beautiful book, and I wanted it to have a different look from the cartoony other ones I did. And so here I am praying again, and I come across an article about Delene Marsh. Now, she was an illustrator that I had always noticed her illustrations in The Friend and The New Era and loved them. And she had moved to Hurricane. So I contacted her, and she was willing to give me some lessons and kind of show me her way of illustrating with pastel. And so because of her, I was able to do this story about all the events, several of the events that happened. I followed a little boy all the way through from him being 11 to 17. Is that right? In those years of building the temple and the different things he helped his dad in the quarry, and then he helped the master carpenters, and his dad was a plasterer, just kind of followed those things. And then I had included a little historical photo on the pages also. So that's been really fun to have right now for the temple rededication, because it tells this story of the original pioneers. And then I absolutely love the story of the tabernacle windows, about how they didn't have enough money to pay for the windows that had traveled all the way around the Cape and up to California. They owed $800. Nobody had any money. And they were able to raise like $200. And then Peter Nelson over in Washington had a dream in the night. He had been saving gold pieces to add on to his little house. And he knew he had to bring that money to David Cannon. I don't know if he knew about the trouble they had, but he walked early in the morning, got over to David Cannon's, gave him the money as the exact amount they needed to pay for the windows, and they were able to go get those. So great story. These are also historical fiction. I've got a little creative license in some of these stories, but the basic things are true. So that's another fun one. And before I did those, I did one about Grandma and Grandpa going on a mission. And I took a class on how to use Illustrator. So these are very crude Illustrator computer that I did those with. And I've done a couple of things for the Santa Clara Museum. When it was our 150th year I think. Is that right, Susie? We made a quilt. Anyway, I don't have a picture of the original quilt, I guess. But our museum board and several other people in Santa Clara, they did quilt blocks of all the old homes. And we decided to do a story about the Santa Clara people who came from Switzerland. And we just used the quilt blocks as the illustrations. So that turned out fun. And then after Lyman asked me to do this third book, I said, no, not this year. And so he did one with Roland Lee, gorgeous one about Zion and Angel's Landing, while I was doing this little activity book. That's Let's Discover Santa Clara with the Glockenspiel kids. Do you all know about the Glockenspiel kids up in our clock tower? And so Susie's great idea to use the Glockenspiel kids to show them around Santa Clara and all the different things they can do. And so it's just a little activity book. A lot of it was stock illustrations that I just manipulated to fit this. So that was what I did before this Christmas book. And then I had this great idea. These other two books are done in watercolor and pastel. And then I thought, oh, this will be so much easier to do digitally because I've been learning how to do that. And once I got going on it in January after a couple of years, and it just seemed like I was making drill team costumes and I was doing a bunch of other stuff that kept me from working on it. So in January of last year, I really got started, and I had to work from like 7 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night to get these done. And I got about half of them done, and we found out I hadn't done them in a high enough resolution. So I had to start over. So, you know, instead of being super easy, you know, in some ways it's easy because you can go back in and change a color or touch up here without having to do the whole thing over again. But it was definitely a learning experience. And as I look at these now, because I haven't touched Procreate, what I did these since I finished this, so how did I do that? I have no idea. But it was fun experience, and certainly learn every time that I've done a book for Lyman. So it's been a great experience, and I just appreciate him for giving me this opportunity. Where else could a little girl from St. George be able to illustrate these beautiful books? So I appreciate him so much for giving me the opportunity. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, Esther. Well, thanks, Esther. That's so awesome. I will mention that we're not trying to be mercenary tonight, but these books are available. We still have I still have the Swiss Days price on these 3 books. They retail for $20, but tonight they're $15. And but they're also available at Deseret Book locally, at Buck's Ace Hardware stores. Imagine that. That's where I sell the most books, is at Buck's Ace Hardware. In Santa Clara, at Dinosaur Crossing, and in Hurricane. They're right there. At Ace, yeah. And
now what about the one on
They're available
Bluff?
at the
We're
Book
gonna be on
Bungalow, our actual bookstore, Book Bungalow on Tabernacle. And what were you saying?
The other Ace Hardware.
Oh,
on
yeah.
Bluff.
I think they were just delivered at the St. George Ace. And trying to think where else. But everything that I've ever done is also available on my website, lymanhafen.com. And it's free shipping, so you can just click a few buttons and get any of my books there.
And my Tabernacle and Temple books are on Amazon for free shipping if you've got Prime, so you can get them for $10 free shipping.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much. Great to see you all tonight.